Okay, for today's project, we're going to be making a Chinese checkerboard. And for this project, the main challenges that we're going to try to solve are how to place the marbles and the holes for the marbles precisely to make this star shape, and how to cut the holes into the surface of the checkerboard. So let's switch to Blender. And before we actually start modeling, I want to show you how this is going to work. So we have this UV sphere, and we want a hole that this would sit in. Now, trying to model that would be very challenging, but there's a modifier that will allow us to use the shape of the UV sphere, to cut the hole out for us. So if we select the cube, we go to modifiers and add what's called a Boolean modifier. We select our object, and then I'm just going to hide this. You can see that the hole is cut for us. So we'll be using that to help make the Chinese checkerboard. So go ahead and open Blender, and we'll delete all of the default objects. And let's start by adding, and Shift A is the shortcut, a mesh circle. And before you click anywhere else, open this panel at the bottom and give it 6 vertices. So that will give us a 6-sided shape. Now hit 7 on the number pad to make sure you're looking at it from the top. And let's switch to edit mode. Now we're going to focus on making one section of this and then repeating that. So we're going to left click and drag, select these 4 vertices and delete those, and that will leave just these 2. Now we need to scale this down towards the 3D cursor, so that way we make a triangle. We're going to come to this menu here at the top. It says pivot point. We're going to change the pivot point to the 3D cursor. Now left click and drag to make sure these 2 are selected. E to extrude, S to scale, and then we can pull that down towards the 3D cursor. Now get as close as you can, and then left click. Then I'm going to zoom in and then use shift middle mouse wheel to get closer to this. And I'm going to scale this again and get really close, something like that. Now I'm going to zoom out. So to make our checkerboard, we need holes in certain places for the checkers to sit in. And it's a very precise design. And to create that, we're going to divide this with 3 loop cuts. So I'm going to put my mouse here at the top center, Control R, sorry, I hit the wrong button there. Control R, roll my mouse wheel up 2 more times, so we have a total of 3 lines. Then double left click to confirm that and to place it. Now we'll have 1 at this point, we'll have 2 here. Then for this one we should have 3, so I'm going to select this, and when I say 2, we have 2 vertices. We need 3 vertices here. So left click, drag to select, right click, and we're going to select subdivide and open this menu in the bottom corner, and we're going to leave this at 1. So now we have 1, 2, 3. Now select these 2, right click, subdivide, change the number of cuts to 2. This gives us 1, 2, 3, 4. Last, select these 2, right click, subdivide, change this to 3, and that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now let's zoom back in here at the point, and the point currently has 2 vertices, and it's not touching right at the center. The reason we left this with 2 is that loop cuts do not work on a 3-sided shaped triangle. So even though this looks like a triangle, it has 4 corners, so loop cuts would work correctly. Now that we have our loops, we need to make this 1 vertice, and we want it right there at the center. So left click, drag and select those two. Right click and go down near the bottom where it says merge vertices. And if the 3D cursor is right in the center, which it should be, we're going to go to merge vertices at cursor, and it will move those two to the cursor and it will combine them into one. Okay. Next, select these 5 vertices. We're going to move the 3D cursor to these vertices. So to move the 3D cursor, Shift S will open this pie menu, which allows you to select from these options. We want the cursor to go to the selected, which is this bottom option. So we'll just move your mouse on it, let go of Shift S, and then it will know that's what you want to do. Now we're going to hit A to select everything. We're going to make sure this is still on 3D cursor, the pivot point. So A to select everything. Now we're going to duplicate this with Shift D. We're going to rotate by hitting R. On the Y axis by hitting Y, then 180, enter. And now that will make the center for our pattern and the star parts that will stick out. Next, let's move the 3D cursor back to the center. So Shift S for the snapping menu, and we'll use cursor to world origin. Oh, let me try that again. There we go. Now hit A to select everything. Be careful for this, don't box select. You'll notice how part of it didn't get selected, and I'll explain why in a minute, but for right now, make sure you hit A to select all. We're going to hit Shift D to duplicate, R to rotate, Z on the Z axis, then 60, enter. Once you have done that, Shift R will repeat that until you have the complete shape. Now, at this point, it looks like this is all one piece, but if I select a vertex and grab it, you're going to see that it's actually still separate parts. When we duplicated this, it moved these over, so these vertices are exactly in the same place, but there are 2 of them. So we need to tell Blender that anywhere there are 2 vertices at the same place, that should just be 1. So press A to select all. Right click for the context menu, go back down to merge vertices, and we're going to use by distance. If you look here in the bottom, the distance is a very, very small number, so anything that's really close to each other or exactly at the same place will now become 1 vertex, so it's now connected. Okay, switch back to object mode, and what we want to do now is create 1 marble that we'll use as a template. So Shift A, once again, make sure you're in object mode, mesh, and UV sphere. I'm just going to grab this on the X axis, slide it over out of the way, and then S to scale. Now notice it's scaling towards the 3D cursor, so I'm going to hit escape to stop that. Go back to the pivot menu, change this to medium point, which is the default setting. Now if I hit S to scale, it will scale like I want it to. What we want is to put 1 UV sphere on every vertex, and that will help us to cut the holes for our checkerboard. To do that, we're going to move this window or panel up so we can see the timeline better. We're going to switch the timeline to a different window or a different editor called the Geometry Node Editor. So click this little drop-down menu, find Geometry Node Editor, and click on that. Now we have our star shape selected. We're going to click New, and that will give you 2 boxes or nodes. This works very similar to the shader editor. Whatever happens on the left tells Blender what should show up on the screen here on the right. So right at the moment, nothing is showing up because that's unplugged. We want to tell Blender to put circles, spheres, on each vertex. To do that, we'll need to add 3 nodes. First, we'll hit Shift A and type in instance, and you're looking for instance on points, and connect that. And this all disappears because Blender knows that you no longer want to see the star shape, but instead you want to see something on every vertex of that shape. It doesn't know what the something is, so now we have to add, by doing Shift A, an object info node. We'll put that here to the left. We have to tell Blender which object. So if we click this eyedropping tool, we can come up to the 3D viewport and left click on our object, and it will select that. We want to know the geometry or shape of the object, so we want a sphere. We'll plug that into the instance, and you can see we have a bunch of those, but they're really big. We also want to keep the scale of our original object. And now if we select the sphere, we can scale it, and the rest will scale along with it. Last, we need to add, so Shift A realize instances node, and that will connect here to the right of this node. If this node wasn't there, Blender would show you the spheres, but Blender wouldn't see them as real, so they wouldn't work to cut holes. So for Blender to know that they're quote-unquote real, it has to realize the instances so that way it can use it to cut holes in another object. Okay, let's go back to our 3D viewport. We can scale this down a little bit, and we're going to go Shift A to add mesh cylinder. We want to change this to have 6 vertices, and I'm looking at from the front by hitting 1 on the number pad, and I'm just going to scale that up so it's bigger than my marble pattern. Then, still looking at from the front, I'm going to scale that on the Z-axis and make it however thick I want. Grab that on the Z and pull it down. Next, we need to cut the holes. So we're going to select the checkerboard. We're going to go to the modifiers. We're going to add a Boolean, B-O-O-L-E-A-N, and we're going to select the marbles. Now you can't see it, but if I select and hit H to hide, I can see that the holes have been cut. So I'm just going to hit Alt-H to unhide that. Now we want to select the checkerboard, and we want to confirm or apply the Boolean. So that way if I move the marbles, those holes are still there. Last, we're going to make our marbles to sit in that. So we don't need all of these. Typically you have enough marbles to fill the little triangles on the outside. Let's select the checkerboard, hit H to hide. And right now these are all pretend. So we need to make them real. To do that, we're going to apply the geometry node here in the properties panel. Now, if I go into edit mode, they're all real things that I can edit. I need to separate these. They're all one object. So in edit mode, hit A to make sure they're all selected. P for separate, and by loose parts. So everything that's not connected will be its own object. We're going to switch to object mode, but when we do, don't select or unselect anything. So go into object mode. For right now, all of these circles, all these spheres, have an origin point right in the center, but we want them to have their origin point in the center of each individual marble. So we're going to right click, set origin to geometry. Once we've done that, we can go through and select the ones we don't need and delete those like so. Then hit Alt-H to unhide our checkerboard, and that will give us a Chinese checkerboard.